talent is a weird one, because if you look at sport, and if you look at whether it's a rugby team, a football team, or martial arts, at a base level, if you take a group of athletes, the most talented athlete is seldom the one that gets the farthest, because it's that combination of, like, the talent to me is your predisposition towards being good at something or learning something. And that's fine. But it is the grit and determination and application of that talent that really separates, you know, the good from the great.
This podcast is part of the GK Media Studios Creators Network, helping people tell their stories. Become a storyteller today and learn about our podcaster network at gkmediastudios.com.
Welcome to Psychology with a Sparkle, the podcast. This is episode 5 and I'm your host, Dr. Denise O'Dwyer. I'm delighted today to be joined by Donal O'Donoghue, Managing Director of Sanderson, a global recruitment company and the host of Talent Matters podcast, and a regular fixture on which radio station, Donal? News Talk?
Bit on News Talk with Pat
News Talk
Kenny.
with
Yeah,
Pat
I used
Kenny.
to do a bit with Matt Cooper on The Last Word as well.
Yeah, great stuff. So welcome, Donal. Thank you so much for making the trip from Dublin.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And as we were chatting there before we started recording, delighted to be able to return the compliment, having been on the Talent Matters podcast myself a couple of times. So.
A couple of times. You're the only guest to make a return appearance on the show. So
I was very honoured, very honoured. So anyway, good to have you, Donal. So before we kind of delve into the world of talent, because I know that's something that you're really passionate about, I wanted to chat to you a little bit about your former life as an international Taekwondo athlete. So will you chat to us a little bit about all of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while. I retired from competing in 2012 after my final competition was the World Cup in Brighton in England, and I was fortunate to win the World Cup, which was a great way to go out.
Absolutely.
But I started at 10 years of age. I guess it was the time where, you know, martial arts movies were on the TV and in the cinema. And I remember the road I lived on, 4 or 5 of us, somebody's parent figured out that there was we thought it was a karate class, and we all wanted to go and do martial arts. So we went up and the 5 of us trained for a couple of weeks. I knew the minute I walked into the gym that I loved everything about it.
Yeah.
I remember saying to my dad, you know, I love the sounds, I love the smell. Like, what is that smell? And my dad said to me, you know, that's the smell of sweat and feet. And I was like, I don't know, I love it. It just felt like home. And, but yeah, trained in that same club for, you know, a number of years, got my black belt. My best friend, Carl, and I, Carl Maloney, who's now down in Australia, but we competed at the competitions all over Ireland and, you know, had some success. And I remember at one stage being at a competition out in, I think it was in Tala. And we were all kids, you know, sitting around, and it was a bit like you'd see the different tracksuits from all the clubs from around the country, and people had different colour belts and uniforms, and, you know, there's all the kind of competitive environment, people cheering for their team. And then there was silence as these 5 men walked into the room. They had Ireland written on their back.
Okay.
And there was an international match between Ireland and the English team. And I remember saying to one of the other kids, "Who are they?" And they're like, that's the national team. That's the men's team. They're the best in the country.
Okay.
And they fight all over the world. And
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, that's what I want to do.
Okay.
So by 2003, Ireland got 2 gold medals at the World Championships in Poland. In 2005 at the World Championships, we got a silver medal.
Yeah.
And then, it just kind of developed from there. And you know, my career ultimately ended in 2012 at the World Cup. I was, you know, probably 36, 37 by then. So it was time to step back. I'd moved into more of a coaching role. And then when I finished competing, I didn't want to be involved with the sport anymore. I didn't want to coach. I didn't want to stay on. I kind of felt, you know, that chapter was closed. But what was really satisfying to see, you know, in recent years, like by 2019, 2020, Ireland became the number 1 team in the world.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel that even though you're contribution towards the sport or coaching, whatever is over, you can see that the progression kind of had
Absolutely.
continued. So
Yeah.
Ireland now are, certainly top 5 in the world in that sport.
Yeah.
So it was a great time, lots of chances to compete all over the world, to make really good friends in lots of different countries. And fantastic experience all around.
It's amazing. And in terms of, because obviously that requires, a lot of both physical and mental discipline. So, like, how did you kind of prepare yourself, like, in that respect? Obviously, you had a fairly hectic training schedule, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it was pretty challenging in that it's an amateur sport, so you're working full time. But for me, the training schedule when I was competing was very much, a couple of mornings a week, getting a run in before work. Then going from work, I worked in the city centre and I'd go training, 3 or 4 nights a week into the Taekwon-Do centre, which was on Exchequer Street in Dublin too. So it was very central.
Okay.
And you would train. And like I remember I said some of the guys were in the guards, probably not a great advertisement, but one of them was a detective. And, you'd be in the class, training or sparring, and you'd hear the Garda radio upstairs where he's been called. He should have been out on doing whatever he should have been doing. But it was that. So it was, you were balancing trying to get some strength and conditioning sessions in during the week. It was a sport where you're competing based on your weight. So I competed at 71 kilos, believe it or not.
Okay.
So you were constantly trying to make sure that the nutrition you were getting in was optimal, and you're kind of managing your strength to weight ratio. Training in the evenings then after work, which is pretty tiring. And then during the competitive season, you'd have a squad session on a Saturday where the people from all over the country would get together, and that could be like a 6 or 7 hour session where you go through all the different disciplines. But it was phenomenal, and some great friends from that period of time, and great memories. And actually, I coached as well. I taught in a number of different clubs. I had a full-time gym in Rosemount Business Park, and then I had clubs in Mulhuddart and Dunboyne. And I had a club with a friend of mine in Santry, Darren Doherty.
That you owned yourself, don't
you?
So you're always kind of an entrepreneur.
We always, I mean, it's more of a social enterprise, to be honest with you. You don't make a ton of money teaching martial arts, but it's kind of the understood thing that if you get to a level, you give something back.
Sure.
But I was lucky to have some really great athletes that I coached. Darren Doherty, who was a European silver medalist and a very good, and he still is around, a very good competitor. Chloe Aboud, who went on to win European and World Championships. Marcin Owaruszko from Poland, who moved to Ireland. He was a phenomenal competitor. So I was very lucky to have really good people that not only were friends, but were also that I got to coach as well. So
fantastic.
Good times.
Absolutely.
But, a world away from the life of recruitment.
And I suppose at that time, I'm just kind of, because this is something that I was thinking about, I wouldn't imagine, or maybe, things like mental visualization, mental imagery, were they kind of things that were alive and well? I mean, they've very much come to the fore now in terms of what athletes do and, how they mentally prepare themselves. Was that something that you would have done at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a real divergence between the old school and the new school in terms of sports psychology and sports science around the time. So if you imagine, when I started training, it was the mid-1980s. And most of the coaches that were responsible for helping us to develop weren't qualified in, sports or sports education or sports science, or wouldn't have had that background. They were just the first generation of people who trained in martial arts. So they could have been, from all different, maybe from trades backgrounds, and had just happened to come a little bit ahead of us on the journey. But what happened, I think, around the kind of mid to late 90s was the next generation of coaches came through who had gone to university and maybe studied sports science or had done some sports psychology. So there was that kind of changeover. And it also kind of coincided with the time where there was more collaboration between countries. So coming back to the visualization side of things, what was really useful for me because you get to a stage where you hit a certain ceiling in terms of your development, your physical capability, your belief in yourself in terms of what your limitations are. And I remember going to a very famous club again in Poland, in a city called Lubartów, with one of the best coaches in the world. And I was training alongside a guy called Daniel Działa, who's a few times world champion. And at this stage, Ireland didn't have any individual world champions. And we're doing the exercises together, and we're running, and we're kind of kicking the shields and doing all the stuff that you do. And I realized, I was like, okay, we're as quick, we're as strong. And it was just some really fine tuning. And a lot of the conversations with some of those really good athletes at the time and that particular coach came down to visualization. It came down to, when you physically prepared as best you can, and then when you look at the actual execution on the day of a big fight or a big competition, so much of what you deal with in terms of managing your fear and managing your nerves or any anxiety that you feel, you can really manage that through visualization. You should feel so familiar on the day that you go onto that floor.
Yeah. You've mentally rehearsed it.
You've mentally rehearsed it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
So what I did when I had my own gym was I made the gym feel as much like the competition environment as I could.
Fantastic.
So we had, the blue and red mats on the floor. And when the kids, even for coaching really young kids, when the kids would be training, instead of training in silence, we would encourage that whoever wasn't training or competing or fighting at the time will create a tournament-like environment where they'd all kind of pick teams and be cheering for their teams.
Brilliant.
But to create that pressure cooker of noise and enthusiasm and energy.
Absolutely. So important.
And then so when they go to the competitions, they kind of it would feel like home, feel familiar and comfortable.
100%.
So that's where a lot of the visualization came in. So coaching it into others and then using the same thing for ourselves as a team and myself personally, that was really useful. But
like I often talk about Professor Aidan Moore, and he was in UCD. He's now passed away, but he was huge. Like, he used to work with some of the top athletes in Ireland, and like he was the person who introduced me first to the whole. It was kind of more known as mental imagery and, kind of tapping into the side of visualization. But it was just like, and I think it's really come to the fore now, in that not just athletes, but people in general are using it to kind of just, have better lives, essentially, and to mentally rehearse things like that, even if they're going for a job interview or whatever it is, to actually, see yourself, feel how you're going to feel in the hot seat, if you like.
It's so true. Yeah. And it's like that old expression about proper preparation and planning prevent piss poor performance, or whatever they say.
Yeah.
When it comes to a job interview, the most effective thing anyone can do is at the kitchen table with a family member, running through the common questions that they're going to be asked, whether it's talk me through your CV or whatever those questions are. Because if you do the preparation and you do it on paper, the written word compared to the spoken word are so different.
Oh,
and when you hear yourself say something and you go, oh, that didn't come out right, it's only the second or third time that it'll really start to flow.
Yeah.
It's the same with sports performance. It's the same with stuff like this, podcasting, whatever you're doing. It's all about hearing yourself.
If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Isn't that the expression? Yeah.
And even when you think about it, I know, like if you think about public speaking, people really, really feel uncomfortable until they get used to public speaking. But actually the only way to manage that is to get up and practice what your talk aloud, whether you're on your own and just talking to yourself in the house 5, 6, 7 times before you go out there to do it. It's the only way to manage those nerves and to make you feel comfortable.
100%. Yeah. And it's even actually something that I would do with clients. Like that, if they're kind of, nervous about having a difficult conversation with somebody, that you'd actually, walk them through it as though, okay, pretend I'm the person. And, again, as you say, it's to kind of help them, get that sense of ease around actually using their voice and projecting it in the way that they want to actually. Because, sometimes when it comes to, as you said, the likes of, public speaking and public engagements, that's really where people kind of lose their nerve and, don't always perform at their best.
And because of that, and it's all about fear, and the best things in life are always on the other side of fear.
Absolutely.
And if you have a fear of public speaking, and then you kind of reaffirm that fear to yourself, saying, I'm not good at public speaking.
And that can create a phobia then.
A phobia, yeah. And then so you're kind of building up to the event. Whereas if you take the opposite approach to it and go, okay, I mightn't be very used to this or very familiar with this, but I'm going to practice the speech 6, 7, 8 times before I go up and do it.
Yeah.
That familiarity is what will really help you get it across the line.
Yeah.
So it's the same. And that's one of the things at Sanderson that we do as kind of par for the course. When somebody's going for an interview, we'll always make sure that we do interview prep with them. And if they're going to, a second interview, a lot of the time you have to prepare a presentation. So we'll give them some feedback on the presentation. But the value is in the person actually getting to hear themselves say it aloud under pressure, creating that slightly uncomfortable environment.
Absolutely. So you mentioned Sanderson, obviously, Donal. So I want to kind of, I suppose you've spoken a little bit about your earlier life, but so what kind of prompted you to enter the world of talent?
Well, I knew one thing. When I was in secondary school, I knew that I didn't want to do transition year and I didn't want to go straight to college because I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I knew I wanted to work. I wanted to do something commercial. I thought it would be, sales or marketing or something like that. But I just wanted to get out and get working. And a good friend of mine, Philip Horton, his mum was Mary. She was a partner in one of the top executive search firms in Dublin.
Okay.
So she used to recruit, CFOs and CEOs for all the big companies back in the 90s and early 2000s. And these were the days before mobile phones.
Okay.
So when we'd be sitting in Philip's kitchen or playing video games in the sitting room, Mary would sometimes be at the at the telephone in the hall, making candidate calls in the evening where she might be talking to a CEO about why it might be a great move to move from an engineering company to a technology company. And she was so informed about company culture and strategy and all that kind of stuff. I thought, wow, it sounded really interesting.
Yeah.
I thought careers sounded really interesting. She seemed to be able to talk about everything from a technology company to an engineering company.
Sure.
And I was like, wow, it's really impressive.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of went into the subconscious. And after I left school, I had a stint where I didn't know what I was doing. I started to study auctioneering and that wasn't for me. And dropped out of that and was flipping burgers at McDonald's in Dunleary for 6 months thinking, is this really where my life is going? And I remember I'd started a job and was doing some sales and an ad came up in the newspaper because obviously it was 1996. And it said trainee recruitment consultant. And I remember thinking, oh, that's my route to get into this kind of recruiting or talent space. And that's, similar to what my friend's mom did. So I applied for that position and it was a really good opportunity because it was a startup company in Dublin. We had a tiny office behind Searson's on Bagot Street. And there was the MD, who was an Irish guy who had just come back after working for a big recruiting firm in London.
Yeah.
And myself and an administrator. And it was a really good opportunity to learn, from somebody really capable and really established in the field. And I just got great training from him. And so, they were the kind of the early days of learning the trade. From there, I moved into the Marlborough Group, which was the first Irish recruitment company to go public.
Okay.
So we, at this stage, I was 21 years of age. The CEO was only 36. So the entire company, and we had 380 people in offices in Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Galway. We were 380 people, turning over maybe 20 million pounds, making pre-tax profits of 6 million quid. And we were basically children.
Okay.
We also acquired a company in the UK for 14 million pounds at this stage. We went public. And I suppose at a very early age, I realized that, okay, you can start a career in something like recruitment and you can be an individual contributor, but this is a way to kind of scale a team. And if you can scale a team, you can scale an office. And if you can scale an office, you can scale into other businesses. And provided you can run a profitable business, then you can potentially acquire other businesses. So over the last 25, 26 years, I've really enjoyed working in the talent space. To me, it's the heartbeat of an organization. When a board of directors sits down, aside from reviewing the commercial performance, how the organization is growing and what profitability looks like and where the strategy is going, usually the number one topic is around people. It's about the talent, Have we got the right talent coming in? What are we doing to develop our talent and retain them and make sure that they're engaged? And that has always, between the sporting side and the commercial side, has always been a really key part for me.
So how do you recognize? Obviously, like you've like so much experience, and as you say, like something that you're really comes through that you're so passionate about it, Donal. But how do you recognize talent?
Yeah, so like talent is a weird one because you see, if you look at sport, and if you look at whether it's a rugby team or football team or martial arts or whatever the sport that you're interested in is, at a base level, if you take a group of athletes, the most talented athlete is seldom the one that gets the farthest because it's that combination of like the talent to me is your predisposition towards being good at something or learning something. And that's fine. But it is the grit and determination and application of that talent that really separates, the good from the great.
Yeah.
So I look at lots of different things. When I look at it for when we're hiring people for clients, you've obviously got to look at, cognitive ability, because, to me, intelligence is about processing speed. We all have different cognitive ability. The people that are smarter aren't necessarily more accomplished. They can just get there more quickly sometimes when it comes to decision making. Then I look at risk appetite, because growth in both business and sport is all about how you manage risk. Yeah. So if you're risk averse, you can miss out on opportunities.
Won't be able to make decisions.
Yeah, and if you take uncalculated risks, you can play too fast and loose. So it's all about how you manage risk. I think that's really important as well. And then it comes down to, I think, conscientiousness as well. You've got to, talent alone doesn't work unless you've got the orderliness and the industriousness to kind of structure how you engage your talent. So when I think about conscientiousness, it's like the ability to see things through to completion, to work in an orderly way, to get yourself back on task when you get distracted with other things, or whether it's injury in sport or whether it's a tough market, a tough economy, or a downturn in business. It's that resilience to be able to pull yourself back in and work in an orderly and structured way to execute the plan.
Exactly. And to be able to get things over the line and that people can rely on you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely. Because I think where it can get quite difficult sometimes is if you look at the amount of businesses that fail. Sometimes there are really good ideas, but it's not necessarily the idea, it's the execution. It's, okay, how do we plan this? What are we, what's the strategy and what are the tactics? What are we trying to do and how are we going to do it? And then what controls do you put in place? Yeah. And once you figure out that plan, it's very easy to start, but it's actually sticking with it in a really structured and orderly way through ups and downs that'll actually bring you to the kind of success. And that's where most people fail. It's like, with a couple of hurdles along the way, they deviate from the plan and then think, oh, maybe it wasn't quite right, or maybe the idea was wrong. But actually, sometimes it's actually just bringing yourself back to your mission and keeping on that track.
So kind of moving over then to the podcast side of things. Obviously, you've been hosting Talent Matters now for how long?
So we started in January 2024. Yeah. So we did an episode per week, most weeks of 2024. So it's been going for a year, just over a year. And it's been fantastic. So the whole idea with it was, or where it came from was that I used to be the president of the Employment and Recruitment Federation, which is like the representative body for all. Is there
anything you haven't done?
Yeah,
I know. My gosh.
It sounds, I was called Johnny Join Me Up. Johnny joined me up at one stage because I don't know. I think it's the way I've approached most things in life, whether it was sport or whether it was the recruitment industry. I quite like to give back to what I'm doing. And if I feel there's a way to help things improve and to that whole thing of a rising tide rises all ships. So I got great value from being a member of the Employment and Recruitment Federation, as the MD at Sanderson, and, became part of the committee. And I was on the committee, which is the board of directors, for 8 years. So I was secretary and treasurer, and then I spent 4 years, I was vice president, and then spent 4 years as president. And part of that is you're representing the sector to government. So we would have worked with the various departments to develop a degree in recruitment practice for recruiters in Ireland. We're the first country in the world that has a level 8 honours degree in recruitment practice. There's, in any other country, recruitment is a subset of HR, whereas in Ireland, recruitment stands alone, as separate to HR, as a separate career path. So I was involved with that. And then you've got the kind of, I suppose, acting as a spokesperson for the industry, when legislation would change around banded hours or the minimum wage or auto-enrollment for pensions, you'd have to take a view on how that's going to impact the labour market and the recruitment sector and all of that. So I had basically started to represent the Federation to the media. So I do some radio slots and TV. And then the main thing, there's a conference every year called TalentCon, which is on in March in the, I was going to say the Burlington, the Clayton, I think it's the Clayton Burlington, the old Burlow Hotel. I think it's the Clayton Burlington Road. And as part of that, I would do an interview at the end of the conference. So we had Brian O'Driscoll one year, we had Christy Dignam from Aslan another year, different people like that there. Mary Robinson last year. And so there was always this kind of key interview or fireside chat at the end of the conference. And when my term as president was over there a couple of years ago, I thought, I'm going to miss that. I'm going to miss those conversations where, as a recruiter, sometimes you want to sit down with somebody and understand the journey they've been on, where they came from, what life was like for them growing up, what influenced them, maybe what they studied and why, and how they ended up in, and what challenges they overcame as well to have a successful career. So this was kind of in the back of my mind. And then coincidentally, somebody called into the Sanderson office one day with cupcakes to say, we've just opened a new marketing and podcast studio, literally in the same courtyard as where our office is in Dublin too. And it turns out one of the shareholders of that business was a guy called Bernard Nolan, who was on the junior Taekwondo team when I was on the senior team.
Oh my gosh.
So I hadn't seen Bernard in years. And he said, we've got a new studio here. And I said, that's funny. I was thinking about maybe doing a podcast or whatever. So that kind of was the initial kind of idea for it. And a lot of the early guests were people that I would have known either through Sanderson or through the Employment and Recruitment Federation. So we had people like the early episodes, we had Nadia Dan from Ashford Motors and Ray Goggins from Ultimate Hell Week and Keith Barry, the mentalist, and Mike Ross, brilliant Irish rugby player, and different people like that who had kind of, Sonia Lennon came in and did an early episode. So I kind of cashed in some favors in the early days to try and get the themes together, because the idea with it was to follow 3 themes, which were talent, skill acquisition, and grit. So I originally thought it was going to be a business podcast, and then it ended up being more of a kind of a life story, journeys, personal development, self-improvement, a little bit of business in there maybe for some people. And then some of it was just about resilience and just different life stories.
That's a huge theme on it. And so what are some of the themes that you've noticed emerging amongst guests?
Lots of interesting stuff. I think it's almost, to me, when I looked at it after probably by the time we'd done 20 episodes or so, it seemed like the narrative that was common through a lot of the episodes was almost like the hero's journey. Where there's, a path that you start out on in life. There's the challenges that present themselves, whether your family of origin or illness or just different circumstances or financial circumstances. And that when those challenges present themselves, that we're stronger than we think we are, that when we have to dig deep into ourselves, and sometimes you just have to get on with it, when things are really tough. But that through a combination of going back to basics and concentrating on our own development, whether it's after a trauma, maybe getting back to fitness or getting back to the structure of employment or whatever it is, or if it's, like one of the people that was on, Aisling Byrne, is an Irish show jumper who had a pretty catastrophic accident where a horse reared up and fell on her and really damaged her spine and pelvis, and she ended up in severe traction. But I remember she was saying on her episode about how that motivation of getting back on the horse and looking out through the horse's ears again was what kind of drove her on. And I remember thinking, I don't think if I was in her shoes, I would have felt that way. But you don't know until you're in that situation. And I think the feedback that we got was that I think the guests came across as being really authentic.
Yeah.
Because I think we live in an age where between social media and Instagram and TikTok and all of those things, there's a very curated image of what life should be like. And I know like we had Rory O'Connor from Rory Stories on, and Rory's a really funny guy, and he's got his videos have had billions of views now on social media at this stage. But he shared, some really authentic stories from his life and his career and some of the things he's struggled with, but also some of the courage he had shown at a time to kind of start this social media comedy kind of thing that he's gone on to, write 4 or 5 books. And so like, I
that's
think
what people want to hear. Yeah, absolutely.
And seeing
the
a
real
little bit
stuff.
And hearing a little bit of the behind the scenes and the not so polished and the not so glamorous stuff, So
absolutely. So like in a similar vein, Donal, what maybe are some of the challenges that you yourself have experienced and overcome? Whatever you're comfortable talking about. Obviously, you don't need to kind of,
it's a good question. It's so nice to be on the other side of the microphone.
For me too.
I know it's so nice to be on the other side of the microphone, and it's so unusual because I'm usually the one asking the awkward questions. What are the difficult things? I think there's probably a few that stand out. So I think work-wise, I started working in recruitment when I was 21. And probably for the first, 10 or 15 years, everything just went really, really well. I kind of took to it like a duck to water. And it gave me, comfortable living, and it gave me a lot of satisfaction, and you kind of felt that you were progressing. I remember 6 weeks before Callie was born. Callie is my second daughter. She's 15 now. But 6 weeks before she was born, I was made redundant from my role. And I remember thinking, okay, I had an 18th month old in my eldest daughter, Cara. And then, there was another baby on the way, and it was just after the global financial crisis was kind of really underway. So we're kind of the mid to late. So Callie was born October 2009. And I think for the first time, that was a huge challenge to realize that, this gravy train that, had been going as the Celtic Tiger had been booming for years. So that was really tough, and that really tested me. So what I decided to do then, there were no big jobs going in recruitment at that stage. So I basically, that was when I signed a lease on a kind of an industrial unit in Rosemount Business Park. I put down the mats. I used the fact that at that stage I was European and world silver medalist in Taekwondo. And I created what became the number 1 Taekwondo gym in the country for a couple of years. The number 1 gym for years had been River Valley Taekwondo Club in Swords, where they had produced all these European and world champions for a long period of time. And we developed a gym, which was called Dublin ITF, that for 2 years became the number 1 gym in the country. So it took probably, 5 or 6 years to get it to that stage. So that was quite good. And you could make a reasonable living from it, but I remember thinking it's not quite the same as having a steady job with a salary coming in. I'm going through a divorce at the moment, and that's very challenging. It is, I think it's really tough, particularly when there's kids involved. And I think the way divorce is set up, it tends to pit the parties against each other. It's adversarial in nature, and that's very tough. And to see the damage that it does to children is very difficult. So that's definitely been a real challenge. But like every challenge, there's the yin and yang. So a few years ago, I was very lucky to meet the love of my
The
life.
lovely Leanne.
Yeah, the lovely Leanne.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's a bit like the theme of those podcasts, you know, it's only when you go through the wrong relationship with the wrong person that you really appreciate when you find your person.
And you had actually met in a former kind of much earlier, hadn't you?
Yeah, we'd met a few years earlier, kind of coincidentally. We were living in the same estate and the kids were friends. So like we had met literally for 2 or 3 minutes on the green to say hello to each other, you know, 4 years earlier. And I remember, you know, Leanne came over, she said hello, she introduced herself as Lauren's mum, and we said hello to each other and probably spoke for a minute or 2 minutes or something like that. But I remember I turned around and I walked away. So we were on the green, her house was over there, my house was over there. So we kind of walked in opposite directions and I'd probably taken 10 or 15 steps. And I remember I stopped and I kind of thought, you know, why couldn't I meet someone like that? You know, and I remember there was just that instant connection and that instant kind of thought
recognition.
It was really, and it was really impactful. And I remember it actually made me physically stop walking and thinking, why couldn't I meet someone like that? You know, and it wasn't until years later that everything aligned.
Worlds collided again.
And but yeah, it's been the best.
So now, and you have a blended family now together.
We have a blended family. We do. So, which is great because the kids have known each other since, you know, they were very, very small. So I think it was probably quite a good transition for them. And very, like, there's a real familiarity there and a trust. And blended families are, I suppose, they're more common these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look, I think, just feel very fortunate. But I think sometimes it takes going through the really crappy relationship or the, you know, the tough breakups, or, you know, that, you know, you do the stint on the dating apps or whatever and you realize how grim the world can be. And then suddenly when the right person comes along, you kind of go, oh, thank goodness.
Do you believe, very philosophical question for you now, Donal, do you believe in kind of fate and destiny when it comes to like that matters of the heart?
Do you know, I would probably say that I don't believe in fate and destiny. But I am shocked when I think of all of the kind of accidents of life and all the coincidences and the kind of butterfly effect of what brings you to, you know, what brought me to be living in that particular place at that time, what brought Leanne to be there in that place at the time, the coincidence of the fact that our kids had become friends and had started hanging around together. There's a lovely photo in the hallway of our house of one day in the sitting room where my kids and Leanne's kids, years before Leanne and I knew each other, all the kids were in the front room eating pizzas and watching whatever was on TV at the time. And there was no indication that years later they'd be a family. Like, it's crazy when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't necessarily say I believe in fate, but...
so you believe we make our own path, we forge our own path?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. But I'm a big believer as well in kind of goal setting and defining your goals. You know, if you want something, really kind of laying out what you want, having a destination and making small kind of micro actions to get yourself there. But the thing when it came to the new relationship, or not that it's new anymore, but the new relationship at the time with Leanne, it was so impactful and so strong immediately. It's like, because I remember when we were talking and you were up doing the podcast with me and I was telling you the story and you were like, was it love at first sight? And for me, it absolutely was love at first sight. And I'd like to think it was for Leanne as well. But I remember I spent so much time kind of trying to Google and understand, is this a thing or is this just infatuation or is it actually a thing? And I would never have believed it.
You were actually Googling that?
Yeah, I was absolutely, because I thought I was going insane. I was like, you know, it was like being 15 years of age again when you were just literally all you could think about was that person. And, but best thing that ever happened to me, you know?
Yeah. And in terms of the kind of blended families arrangement, Donal? Because I know like that poses challenge for some people. What has worked for you in that respect to make things a bit easier, or, you know, how have your families blended as well as they have?
I think I think there's lots of different things to it. I think first of all, the kids are adaptable. They're probably far more adaptable than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
And I think what they thrive in is an environment. Of course, there has to be, a loving and fun environment.
Of course.
But it's consistency and boundaries. And it's kind of funny because I completely changed my view on parenting in the past few years. So originally, when I separated, and I would literally have my kids every other weekend and half of the school holidays, when the kids would come up to Dad's house, it was like they didn't have to do anything because I was so happy to have them. So I was totally overindulging them. I was waiting on them hand and foot. So I'd ask them what was their order for dinner, make it, bring it into them, you know, and then literally pick it up and, you know, go in and wash the dishes or load the dishwasher afterwards. And I remember when Leanne and I got together and she was looking going like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you know, they're not here all the time. And like, this is kind of when they're at Dad's, they don't have to do chores when they're at Dad's house.
Yeah.
And she's like, you're having a laugh.
Yeah.
And now, on a Saturday morning, when the house needs to be cleaned, you've got Callie and Lauren, they're doing whatever, and Jodie's doing the bathrooms, and Meadows doing this, and Aviva's doing that, or whatever. And it becomes a team where everybody kind of pulls their weight. But I think just taking the time to, I suppose, build relationships with each of the kids individually for the step parents, I think is really important. And not forcing it and not rushing it, and really respecting the fact as well that, you know, as a stepdad, you have a role, but they have a dad, you know, and their relationship with their dad is really important.
Yeah.
And as a stepdad, that's a different relationship.
Exactly.
And the same on the other side with, you know, whether my kids are with Leanne as their stepmom, they absolutely adore her.
Yeah.
But they have their mom and they have their relationship with their mom as well. So it's just, and look, I'm not saying that, I wouldn't like to say I'm a poster child to say that this is how it should be done.
Yeah.
But, you know, the proof is in, I suppose, how settled the kids become, how happy they are, how they perform in school, how happy they are in their day-to-day lives. And thankfully, they all seem to be getting on pretty well. But like there's a lot of teenagers in the house and they can be challenging. Like, there has to be an atmosphere of respect. There has to be an atmosphere of fun. There have to be boundaries, you know, in terms of, because I think kids need to know what the boundaries are. And they thrive in that type of environment.
Absolutely.
But then the community piece I think is really important as well. So, you know, my favorite moments are when everyone is sitting around together, whether that's a big breakfast on a Saturday or Sunday morning.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, Donal, was your radio work, actually. And the part I'm interested in, actually, is what you've learned about yourself through doing radio appearances. Yeah.
And it kind of all happened by accident. When Sanderson had started in the Irish market, I was quite conscious that Sanderson had originally started in the UK, and I did a deal with the owners of the UK company for them to invest in the Irish business, and we branded it as Sanderson, and myself and my colleagues, Nicola, Gary and Elaine, kind of set up the Irish office. But I knew we needed to get brand recognition.
Sure.
And I suppose as the leader of the business, I needed to build my profile a little bit.
Yeah.
So our publicist was Sharon Bannerton at the time from Bannerton PR. And she gave me a call one day and said, listen, can you go in and do a slot with Dermot and Dave on Today FM? And the slot was, don't let social media cost you your dream job. In other words, back in the days when people used to put daft stuff on social media, do you remember people used to do this neck challenge where they would, you know, drink a pint really quickly and then jump into a lake? This was probably 10 years ago. It was called Neck Nominate. And then there was the Ice Bucket Challenge.
The Ice Bucket Challenge, I remember that one. Yeah.
You don't remember Neck Nominate? You used to nominate somebody to drink a pint in one go, and then they do something daft. And it was really silly. But so anyway, we did this slot, which was telling people how to, you know, the hacks of how to lock down their Facebook or their Instagram to keep their stuff private if they wanted it private.
Yeah.
And so we did that slot with Dermot and Dave for probably 10 minutes one morning. And the analytics were quite good after
Yeah.
it. So I got a call then the following week from a producer on The Last Word with Matt Cooper.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, look, Matt has a weekly session on a Friday
Brilliant.
called The Week Trending, where you kind of go
Yeah.
through whatever
Yeah.
stories are in the
Yeah.
news that week. And it could be anything from, whatever Trump is talking about
Sure.
to Beyonce to
Yeah.
whatever people were tweeting at the time. And initially I kind of thought, well, I wanted to be known more as the kind of careers and talent kind of guy rather than current affairs or pop
Entertainment.
culture or
Yeah,
entertainment.
Yeah.
And they said, oh no, come in and give it a try anyway. So I did that. And then that became a kind of a regular contributor slot then for probably 3 or 4 years, where I do a couple of Fridays per month for half an hour on The Last Word. And then more recently, it's been contributing on News Talk with Pat Kenny. Lots of stuff from, whatever is happening in the labour market, redundancies, changes in legislation, whatever is going on.
Yeah.
But I remember what I thought was really useful about it was if you've been in the same career for years, and I'd been doing recruitment at this stage for 20 odd years.
Yeah.
Sometimes the growth that challenges you can be missing because you're solving the same problems again and again.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in the studio with Matt one day and we had 3 or 4 newspaper articles that we were going to talk about. And I was watching the clock. So we're at a commercial break and the clock is counting down and there's 25 seconds until we're coming back after the ad break. And one of the producers came in and just put a line through what we were about to talk about and just handed us a piece of paper to say somebody has just thrown a milkshake over Leo Varadkar in Merrion Square.
Okay.
That's what you're talking about.
Okay.
And I looked back at the clock and there was 11 seconds or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking at that moment in time, okay, this being outside your comfort zone, I nearly shit myself. But I was
to really think on your feet.
Exactly. I was like, okay, this is growth. This feels good.
Absolutely.
This is like the challenge.
Yeah.
When
you get the adrenaline rush.
It's like the adrenaline, when you had to step out onto the mats to compete against, somebody that was representing their country and fight, a couple of rounds against them, or you had to get up and do that public speaking or whatever it was.
Yeah.
The light was going red.
Yeah.
It's the last word, and you got 11 seconds to read an article and have an opinion. So it was great.
Fantastic. Yeah, amazing. So the final question, Donal. You've obviously done, as I said to you, is there anything that you haven't done? You're hugely experienced in so many different areas. But I'm interested to know, what is your personal and professional life philosophy, and do the two merge?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think some of the stuff that I enjoy most. So, the main business is Sanderson, and that's all about recruitment and talent and helping organizations to thrive through having the best people, or the best people for them to achieve their objectives. And that's huge for me.
Yeah.
Separate to that, I do a little bit of management consulting where I work with businesses that want to grow and that want to go from good to great. So maybe they've got to a stage where they have a handful of staff and they've now got a little bit of scale, but they're just really trying to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And to me, it goes back to the coaching philosophy. And I remember being a kid and being in those early martial arts classes and thinking, watching how the instructor was imparting information and knowledge. And I remember even as a child thinking, okay, when he explains it this way, it really resonates and it really sinks in. And when he explains it another way, it doesn't. So I was thinking as a kid, when I'm coaching or when I'm teaching somebody, I'm going to use that style because that's what really works for me.
Yeah.
And then when I took that into the workplace, and I started being a recruiter, I realized, okay, I could recruit quite well. But as a team leader, then the balance of how successful your team is how good you are at picking the right people to be on your team and then coaching them
Leading
to be
them.
really good at their job. And it's people who want to self-manage and who want to do well. I really believe in putting them, into operations as soon as possible rather than a lot of formal training and then easing them into it. I'm more kind of throwing at the deep end. And when you have challenges, come back to me, because even when it comes to training somebody on how to use a computer system, a piece of software or something like that, if you formally train them and then let them at it, it's far slower than having them figure it out themselves. And when they hit a roadblock, saying, okay, when you're stuck, come back to me. I see some businesses, for example, if somebody is leading a recruitment business, some people will look across at their competitors. If they're at an awards show or they're at some kind of a corporate event, they're almost looking at their competitor through gritted teeth. And I see my competitors more as peers. And I think so my approach to life, whether it was, you know, the Irish team and the Polish team collaborating together and going on training camps together to make each other better and sharing information rather than being really siloed and polarized. And the same when it came to the recruitment industry. You know, I knew what was working well for us. I knew the value I got from the Recruitment Federation. And actually what I wanted to do then was help other people's businesses to do well, because I kind of feel like it raises the profile of the whole sector.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably my philosophy. And then when it comes to life and family stuff, here's the weird thing that I did, you know, as somebody that like I trained martial arts my whole life. And by the time I retired from Taekwondo, I was the 5th Dan black belt, which is quite senior, you know, goes up to 9. So it's like to get to 5th Dan black belt probably takes 20 something years. But I no longer wanted to be an old fella that used to be somebody in Taekwondo. So I stepped away from that sport completely. Yeah. And I went from being a 5th Dan black belt to joining the local jiu-jitsu club and putting on a white belt again. And that because they're completely different aspects of martial arts. And to go from having been a European and world medalist in one discipline to being the new guy that everybody is choking out in a different martial art was great. So that's what I do now. I turned 50 this year. But I still get down to the martial arts club and train jiu-jitsu at Carlson Gracie in Maynooth 2 or 3 nights a week. And Leanne laughs at me for it. Like I came in the other night and she said, how was training? And I said, pretty good, but I think I cracked a rib. And she's like, you know, are you not getting on a bit now for this? But I was like, I love it, you know, and I love that challenge. So,
Fantastic. That's amazing. Donal O'Donoghue, it's been a pleasure as always. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Steve.